Did you realize that horror movies are widely believed to have started all the way back in 1896? No, that's not a typo. I said 1896, as in a film dating back to the 1800s. That movie was called The Haunted Castle by... here's the letters. You figure out how to pronounce that last name. And even though the film is just over 3 minutes long, and the story is a jumbled up mess with no dialogue to give any context, it is the first time that special effects were used to attempt to scare the audience, which included things like the vampire sending his assistant into the fake-looking fire pit, and a lovely-looking young lady turning into a crone just as she gets the attention of a young man. This film is so old that I'd wager it was only shown in a kinetoscope, which is like this big box that people would pay something like a penny to hunch over and stare through a viewfinder to watch a silent film for a few minutes. And ever since The Haunted Castle arrived in the world, the idea of charging money to scare someone has run rampant. Truly, horror movies are one of the biggest genres in existence, and today we're going to take a journey on the evolution of the scary movie villains. Hey guys, I'm Megan. This is the Fangirl, and while this channel is no stranger to talking about horror movies, admittedly the attendance on a lot of those video essays are weak. So I don't do it a ton because the viewership isn't here. But I decided to spin the wheel and try out this AI assistant thing on TubeBuddy, and those robots assured me that you guys desperately want a video about the evolution of horror villains. So let's get to it. Now, we already talked about the unnamed vampire from the first horror film, The Haunted Castle, and while I don't personally find that character upsetting, I can imagine that he got under at least a few people's skin back 2 centuries ago. However, between 1896 and the 1920s, while scary movies certainly existed, the films revolved more around a concept than an actual villain, such as 1913's The Student of Prague, where the concept of a body double taking over your life is meant to be what scares you. But there really isn't a being behind that double body to be an icon. So this list is really going to get started with the original horror villain icon, Count Orlok, better known by his movie's title, Nosferatu, which released in 1922. That movie ended up being incredibly controversial for so many reasons. Not only was the actor playing Nosferatu a genuinely scary person, seriously, actor Max Schreck made everyone on set extremely uncomfortable, and he was so mysterious that there are tons of rumors still circulating about him today. And just look at this magnificent beast of a villain. We have a textbook image of a vampire who is presented to the audience in a way that still makes our skin crawl to this day. This movie was so scary for the 1920s that it actually ended up being banned in Sweden for what they called excessive horror. The film also hit some legal issues with the Bram Stoker family, who, owned the copyright on Dracula and claimed that Nosferatu was infringement. And as part of that settlement, almost every copy of Nosferatu was destroyed. And what did survive was a complete accident because this was originally a German film, but it was hard to reclaim every copy of the film reels that were sent out internationally. That logistics issue is the only reason that Count Orlok's incredible performance was able to survive. And if you've never seen it, you're in luck because Nosferatu is part of the public domain these days. So please go absorb that absolute creepiness that is Count Orlok, because there has never been anything quite like him before before or after. Also, just to give you some context, in 1922, there were 23 movies that notably released that year. Other titles included Sherlock Holmes, Robin Hood, Oliver Twist, and The Bachelor Daddy. So legitimately, horror was still such a new medium that there was nothing for years to be able to compete with how disturbing the look and mannerisms of Nosferatu were. But the 1930s saw a huge spike in scary movies. Most notably, in my opinion, is Freaks from 1932, where a young, beautiful woman pretends to love the leader of the freaks, whose name is Hans. While Hans is definitely the easiest person to associate as a villain, the plot itself is actually a lot more complicated than that. The very unique thing about this film is that the sideshow performers, the circus freaks, were all played by people who had extreme disabilities and or deformities. And that discomfort translates through the film to the audience. But the movie is framed to make Hans and his crew come off like the unexpected good guys, and the beautiful woman Cleopatra is made to feel like the villain who is out to do Hans harm. The film ends when the freaks attack Cleopatra and turn her into some nightmare duck that has to exist among the freaks now. The visuals alone mess a lot of people up, especially when the freaks chant "one of us, gooble gobble" over and over again. That has stuck with audiences for generations and put Hans on this list as perhaps the world's first sympathetic villain. The 1930s also saw a huge creative spark with the Universal monster movies, including Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Wolfman, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and The Invisible Man, just to name the headliners. While some are more remembered than others, all of these monsters have become pop culture icons of horror. And while some on this list were all-out baddies, others danced that line of being misunderstood or victims of their circumstances, making it hard to fully add them to this list, but hey, we will at least call them out for an honorable mention just for the fact that the makeup work of these films has been so iconic for the horror genre. And the Universal monster movies of the 30s really set the visual precedent for any future releases in these franchises. Universal was really the first studio to set a standard for horror villain icons. Then the 1940s hit, and we started seeing a lot more psychological thrillers disguised as horror movies, such as 1944's Gaslight, where a husband is trying to make his wife think she's insane so that he can take all of her money. We also see things like 1943's The Phantom of the Opera, which, yeah, the Phantom is certainly an iconic figure, but he doesn't really cross that line into a horror villain for me. He doesn't really even do that much, does he? He's mostly like, haha, I cut the ropes and now this show cannot go on, haha, nuts to your capitalism. Additionally, the 1940s really started blurring the lines between horror and comedy, because we see things like 1948's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which deliberately acts to take the scary edge off of the Frankenstein monster. But the horror genre was definitely lacking new icons in this decade, likely due to the effects of World War II and all the resources that took away from the film industry. You know, suddenly a ton of your screenwriters and directors and cameramen are all on the front lines, and those of you left behind are commissioned to make war films to aid the cause. So, understandably, creativity in the horror genre was lacking. With that being the case, it's no surprise that the 1950s saw a gigantic surge in horror movies, especially those that were dubbed bad B films, meaning they were often ridiculous or cheaply made, and they were not the headliner titles that got people into the theater. So we see insanity like The Blob and Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, both of which released in 1958. And trust me here, I went through a lot of movie titles to make this video essay. The two that I just mentioned were the only only two that most people would recognize. However, it does show us a shift in American culture where a movie can be tense and fun at the same time. So we still have a definite hunger for horror, but it's wanted in a context that the entire family can watch it too. 1954 also brought us Godzilla, which, if you have never taken a class on propaganda in film, let me save you a semester by saying that Godzilla is a propaganda movie where our mega beast is this out-of-control monster that can't help its behavior. And that was meant to directly correlate to Japan's actions and behaviors during World War II. That's why by the end of the movie, there's a lot of sympathy going towards Godzilla, because it doesn't want to be an out-of-control monster, but it got stuck in this role due to circumstances outside of Godzilla's own control. Obviously, future movies use Godzilla as an easy cash grab because it's an iconic character, but the real chill of the original film is supposed to be that anyone can get out of control against their own will. So I'm barely going to allow Godzilla to make it on this list, and it is solely based on the original film's intent. Now on to the 1960s, where horror as a genre exploded. We have The Birds in 1963, Rosemary's Baby in 1968, and while both films are iconic, we can't really call Crows or Pregnancy a proper villain. There are a lot of psychological thriller films in the 60s where there is a villainous concept, but not a character on screen to pinpoint as an iconic villain. However, that's also an interesting conversation to have because 1960 brought us the movie Psycho, which was the first time that theater patrons couldn't just walk in and out of a theater as they pleased. They had to be there before the film started or they couldn't come in late, because Hitchcock felt that every scene of this movie was so important to the climax that you had to see it all or it wouldn't make any sense. So even though most psychological thrillers don't have a great or tangible antagonist on screen, Psycho gives us Norman Bates, a pure villain due to insanity. And while Norman does have some sympathetic points in his character, he does fill this horror movie villain gap where he is completely human, yet also completely the thing that goes bump in the night. Norman Bates elevated what terror could be, because unlike Hans and Freaks, who looked drastically different from the average person, Norman Bates's mask was that he looked like everyone else right up until he attacked. Now, we also can't leave the 60s without covering 1968's Night of the Living Dead, which is probably the first commercially successful film to bring us zombies. Although, little asterisks here, because a movie called White Zombie was released in 1932. I have seen it for a zombie class. It is pretty boring. It was kind of more like having someone in a trance so that you could control them like a minion. If you want a unique take on zombies, I can't recommend 2007's Zombies enough. But that's a black comedy with generic looking zombies, so it's not for this list. Night of the Living Dead, though, really got the zombie movement going by offering us these rotting corpses on screen. And that's influenced the zeitgeist on zombies ever since. The Romero zombies probably have more reach on the horror genre than any other villain that we'll talk about. Unfortunately, due to the nature of zombies, there's no head zombie figure to be like, hey, I want this action figure of Zombie King Bob. And that works with the nature of horror in general, but it does make the zombie aesthetic more of a concept over a specific villain. Next, we get to the 1970s, where horror stopped playing with people and tried to give us a heart attack. 1973's The Exorcist brought us the concept of possession, along with one of horror's most iconic looks, the possessed Regan, complete with 360 spinning head action. 1974 brought us Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was banned in so many places for the excessive violence. And then some psychopath went, let's make this into an Atari 2600 video game, which was also banned by so many retailers. 1976's The Omen introduced us to Damien, the son of the devil, who was pure evil in a cute little package, justifying our urges to kick creepy-looking children down the stairs. 1976 also brought us Carrie, and while Carrie is definitely a sympathetic villain, maybe even a protagonist, she does destroy everyone at her school in a pretty gruesome way. And that blood drop scene has never been topped in horror cinema. 1979's Amityville Horror brought us our first evil house, which was instantly iconic. We all recognize the shape of that building. And of course, 1979 brought us Alien, where Ellen Ripley fights off a xenomorph that's, quite frankly, obliterating her space crew. While Alien is technically a sci-fi movie, xenomorphs are some of the scariest monsters to ever be dreamt up, and definitely one of the most iconic looks. But the king of this era is 1978's Halloween, featuring Michael Myers, which is what launched the entire subgenre of the gruesome masked villain, or at least the accessible masked villain, as Leatherface went way too hard and got him hidden from view in a lot of cities. The thing about Michael Myers that hits really hard is that he's so silent, with no known motivation for most of his slaughterings. And there is no effective way to stop him. He is the reason that you look in your back seat before you get into your car at night. And hey, fun fact, that famous Michael Myers mask is actually a Star Trek Captain Kirk mask with the paint stripped off of it. That may make Michael more or less scary for you. Your mileage may vary. Now we get to the 1980s, where not only is creativity in film exploding alongside new and amazing visual effects for the first time, but we start to see a lot of the old villains evolve into new things, and sometimes become their own subgenres of horror. For example, Children of the Corn in 1984 is like a room full of screenwriters went, what if we had like 30 Damiens and no adults? Or 1987's The Lost Boys, where they take that Damien-esque scary children motif and add vampirism to it. Or 1980's The Shining, where we have this haunted building and possession all together. Not to mention The Evil Dead from 1981 really spun off of the rotting zombies and possessions. So we see the groundwork from previous eras really starting to find a good footing in popular culture. The 80s also leans more into B-movie horror, and that really starts to be the groundwork for black comedies. But these were cheesy movies, usually with really low budgets, that were supposed to be more of a fun horror experience. And that's where you might stick things like Little Shop of Horrors, House, Gremlins, Return to Oz, and so many other 80s films. We also have the nerve-wracking Poltergeist from 1982, which still is scary as all get out today. The only reason I don't put a villain from Poltergeist on this list is that Kane, the main ghost villain, is only seen for a moment on screen in the original movie, and he's not even properly identified until the next film, where he looks nothing like the nightmare fuel from the original movie. The villain of this film is so ill-defined, and that works for the movie, but not quite for this list. However, 1987 gave us Hellraiser, and who could ever forget Pinhead after seeing him? He is the ultimate evil of a movie character, with a look so iconic that it puts the 1930s Universal monsters to absolute shame. Then 1988's Child's Play took the let's make a wholesome thing evil element from The Omen and put it into a doll. Chucky is an icon. He's a mood. Whereas his original human counterpart, Charles Lee Ray, is a completely forgettable ingredient to get us to a crazy evil doll. Also in 1980, we were given Friday the 13th, which is, of course, Jason's franchise. And much like Michael Myers, it's a big dude, or his mom, wearing a simple mask. And you can definitely see the spin-off elements of Jason versus Michael Myers, but still, Jason is one of the largest, most iconic horror movie villains to ever be created. He's only bested in the 80s by 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street, which gave us the big dog Freddy Krueger himself. And I would argue that Freddy is the most iconic among iconic horror movie villains. Freddy isn't just out for revenge, he's taking his revenge out on people who did nothing to him, which is an amazing level of pettiness already. But he also attacks exclusively through your dreams. So where you could theoretically outrun Michael or Jason, you'll eventually have to go to sleep. Meaning, if Freddy wants you, he's going to get you, and there's no real escape, as his 10-film catalog will confirm. The 90s were no slouch on horror films either. We had Misery, The Craft, The Blair Witch Project, Tremors, People Under the Stairs, on and on and on. We had vampire movies, ghost movies, zombie movies, but a lot of them were either from remakes or recycled characters carrying over from the 70s and 80s. We don't have a ton of new and iconic villains in the 90s. I mean, we got Hannibal Lecter from 1991's Silence of the Lambs, and he's definitely a scary guy with a strong look when he's wearing that face mask, but he's kind of just Sherlock Holmes if Sherlock were more evil and a cannibal. After having Norman Bates in the 60s, Hannibal Lecter just feels like a guy with severe psychological issues more than some twisted villain. And honestly, while I can't remember the other characters by name, the guy who's like, it puts the lotion on its skin, outshined Hannibal as a villain in his own movie. Hannibal is like the lesser of two evils, and that almost damages his reputation as a villain, for me at least. So I gotta say, when I think of scary movies in the 90s, 1999's Scream, which gave us Ghostface, is the ultimate icon winner of that decade. Ghostface plays off of the already established subgenre of masked killers, but we get this interesting plot device where there are two people wearing the mask, and it's not some supernatural entity that keeps going forever. Ghostface is whoever adorns the mask next, which keeps him fresher than a lot of other villains who struggle to keep a sensible motive going from movie to movie. And that brings us into the 2000s and more modern villains who also tend to be more complex. With the development of straight-to-video DVDs and original streaming content, the amount of horror movies have exponentially grown. Like 2016, The Terrifier. Never seen it, but that clown is so creepy that I recognize him right away. Or 2013's Oculus, where the mirror is evil and gives you visions, and I have intrusive thoughts about eating light bulbs at least twice a week now. We also had a huge uptick in horror television series like American Horror Story, Salem, The Strain, The Walking Dead. There is so much to choose from, and I can only go over a few characters. And no, I'm not going to count Mr. Babadook, because the Babadook is really about not liking being a parent. It's not supernatural at all. So here are the ones that I find to be the most iconic in modern horror. Samara from The Ring in the 2002 American version of the franchise. Samara embodies so many of her predecessors. We have the child quality of Damien, the undeadness of a zombie, the unsettling look and behaviors like Reagan, the unstoppable supernaturalness of Jason, the fear of being unable to escape her like Freddy, the way she is always around and almost in the home with you, kind of like Amityville. Plus, you can't help her, that only makes it worse. Samara is such a good amalgamation of fear with a touch of the Cousin It look that makes her undeniably iconic. Then I'd say the Creeper from 2001's Jeepers Creepers has to make the shortlist here. That beast not only looks frightening, but his backstory is terrifying. He consumes organs and plays seamstress with the bodies. So the Creeper has not only the movie monster vibe, but the major uncomfortableness of Leatherface. And all in a look so good that the I know what you did last summer villain is hecka jealous. And the fact that the Creeper wins at the end of his movie, there is no stopping him, that just makes you feel so powerless against him as a viewer. The Creeper needs to elevate to an official cryptid. I will start a petition. Also, Pennywise, but specifically from the 2017 It remake. Now, granted, Tim Curry did a lot of heavy lifting for this iconic character when it came into existence in the 80s. However, 1986 Pennywise is still a little goofy and friendly looking. Like, I would potentially walk up to him at a circus and not think twice about it. But the eyes of 2017 Pennywise? Oh, those are not to be trifled with. The level of evil in this version of Pennywise is relentless. He is not someone you'd look at and go, maybe he's a silly guy. This is the kind of clown you'd see in Clock Tower 3 when you know you need to run for your life. Not to mention the unhinging of the eyes. Ugh, I can't take it. Next, I have to give credit to Jigsaw from 2004's Saw, who isn't technically evil in and of himself. He's just a weird-looking puppet that someone else is controlling. He's not demonic or possessed. He's just a toy somebody bought. But you see that face. You notice the swirls on the cheek. And no, sir, I do not want to play a game with you. Not to mention his motivation for choosing victims is so bizarre. Remember 3 months ago when that butterfly landed on a flower and you didn't stop to appreciate it? You thereby appreciate nothing and need to go. It's psychotic. Like, my dude, go to a convention, make some friends, play some D&D, and calm down. I also have to give credit to The Bell Dam from 2009's Coraline. One, because I've yet to talk about anything from animation, and two, this movie was truly America's first widely released animated horror film. Yeah, The Nightmare Before Christmas had spooky looking characters, but Coraline is legit scary. They did not pull back the punches, and that movie certainly wasn't written for any elementary audience. Coraline has almost created its own subgenre, and that's largely thanks to the Bell Dam and her freaky button eyes, her unclear motives, and her constantly changing body shape. However, any version of the Bell Dam that you see, you know exactly who it is because of those eyes. And you know to be afraid of her, so she is easily a top horror movie villain icon. Okay, let's wrap this up with one more character. This one came as another suggestion from my comments, and I struggled with it so much. But I wanted to end with a more thought-provoking villain that really summed up how much horror has changed. And this one is perfect. Pearl in 2022's Pearl. Pearl kind of hits this sweet spot between Hannibal Lecter and Norman Bates because not a ton of horror movies use female villains who chop people into bits. And the movie doesn't try to hide who Pearl is. They don't even try to make her seem especially sympathetic. She's crazy and spiraling, kind of like a bratty kid at their birthday party who didn't get the right toys. And we're just there to watch that chaos unfold. Pearl encapsulates the idea of glorifying the villain even when you don't root for them. She is so obnoxious and unlikable and toxic to everyone she encounters, right up until she ends everyone she can to sort of fuel her own ego. And while none of that specifically makes Pearl iconic, come on, Mia Goth screaming out in pain that she's a star has permeated the internet. Whether you even know about this movie or not, you know that moment. So I think it's fair to label Pearl as an iconic horror movie villain, as well as a really good case study on how far the evolution of a horror villain has come. We're no longer cheering on the good guys or liking the bad guys so much that we hope they succeed. We're just observing someone shifting into a villain over fairly minor disappointments. Okay, so those are my thoughts on the evolution of the horror movie villain. Please leave me a comment on where you agree or disagree, or if you think I left anyone deserving off the list. But this has been an extremely long script for me. My mouth is going numb. I can't form words. Mama is tired and I'm taking a nap right now. I might be overthinking it, but that's literally my job. And to any of my members here on YouTube, a huge bottom of my heart thank you for all of your help and support. If you would like to become a paid channel member, there is a link in the description below. Thanks again, guys. Love you. Well, family members, we're almost done, but I want to invite you to hang out with me in some other places. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as my own personal self, and I have a Facebook page too, but I mostly just post photos over there. And sometimes people say, "Hey McGann, I want to mail you something. How do I do that?" Easy. Just click the About tab on my channel page, and my most current P.O. Box info will be right there. I also run another channel, The Family. It's really a hodgepodge channel where we might post anything. Oh yeah, and I also sell shirts and stickers and stuff with the Family and the Fangirl logos. If that is your cup of tea, I have a link in every description of every video. Finally, if you want to help out the Fangirl channel and make sure I'm putting out video essays for years to come, the best way you can help is by subscribing and watching more of my videos, whether they're new, old, whatever. Maybe even share one or two on social media, help spread the word. People who watch to the end of videos like you helps to tell the site, hey, this is a good video, we should recommend it to other people. So if you made it this far, leave me a comment of something like, hey, I made it to the end. Love ya. See you next time, family members. Bye.